Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, and we are continuing the Fawlty Towers reviews. We are now at Season 1, Episode 6, the final episode of the first series, as John Cleese called it. I guess that's a difference between English vernacular and American English vernacular, where we always will just call it season while they go series. It's like one of those weird little things, like, it's more a British thing, I understand, to call actors artistes as slang, but it kind of makes sense in a way. I mean, acting is an art form. Even though some people will go, it's easy. It's like, study acting, you see it is an art form. Of course, this is one of my favorite episodes of the entire series, and as we'll see as I get into this episode, it has one of my favorite moments of the entire show. And if you got to show someone a moment to show what this show is about, if you don't pick the freak out from the previous episode, you would pick this episode's moment. And that, of course, is the Germans. Episode so well known that that's all they had to put on this VHS. And in case anyone's wondering, this is the one where I had the wrong cover for it, that I showed it in the first one. Whereas this one, it had the builders and all that. Then when I popped it up, I'm like, the Germans? Oh, well, it worked. Funny thing is, the last episode on this VHS is a touch of class. It's like, so they have the last episode of Season 1, and then follow it up with the first episode of the whole show. That's VHS's for you. I guess they're like, no one's gonna know. You can kind of watch these episodes and think because of the loose continuity anyway. Now, the plot of the episode is that Sybil is going under the knife for a very minor operation. She's gonna be in there a couple days, but, she's gonna be gone, so Basil's gonna have the run of the hotel to himself, so he's gonna have no supervision. In case anyone's wondering, she's getting an ingrown toenail removed, and Basil does make light of it a little bit. And as he leaves, it leads to one of the few moments where we do see one aspect of Basil's conservative views that we haven't seen, and that is when it comes to race relations. And he sees one of the few people of color we see in the entire show, and that is Sybil's doctor, who is black, and the way he reacts, like, huh? Like he's surprised. Now, he's a little bit weirder later on after he suffered but here he's like trying to be cordial, but you can tell from the way Cleese plays it off that he's like a little weirded out, like, really? A black doctor? It's like he stepped out of Blazing Saddles. A black sheriff, only toned down a lot more, obviously, because it's not like you're going to pull a gun on the doctor. The doctor is a thing. He's not going to pull that. But you can tell he's probably thinking it. Which, of course, leads to probably the most controversial moment of the episode, in later years, that is, where Basil is talking with the Major, and the Major, because he's not old there, starts going on about people from India and other places, and he uses a couple words that are like, ooh. He uses the N-word and a couple other slurs, which this has garnered so much controversy that it was edited out of the episode twice. This year, 2020, as I record this, it was removed from the streaming service. Now, I've heard different reports whether they just took that little part out of the episode, make a weird edit, like in the episode involving the vomit, or they removed the episode completely from the streaming service. Either way, it does a disservice to the episode. And then it was also edited in 2013 for broadcast on TV for similar reasons, which apparently was approved by Cleese's management, but I can't find anything that states whether Cleese himself approved of it. I have a feeling, based on other things he said, he probably would have been like, no. Because it does a disservice. It's like how a lot of those companies would start to edit their movies and edit cartoons from the older period because of some weird things. Except for Warner Brothers, because they put that thing in front of them when they would finally release it on video. It's like, there are outdated attitudes. They were wrong then and they're wrong now, but to pretend they didn't exist is a disservice to the artwork. That's the same thing here. To pretend this didn't exist is a disservice to the artwork. And that also plays true with later on when Cleese is interacting with the Germans. Like, it does a disservice. I don't see them editing that part out, but then they edit out the Major's rant. It's because he drops a couple racial slurs. I mean, it is kind of one of those ones like, yeah, I can't believe he's doing it. But unlike some other characters in fiction that have said that stuff, and some real people who would say the same thing, Major does have a slight excuse because he's not all there. Whether it's the result of his wartime actions or it's just his body catching up with him, that would have happened regardless of whether he was in the military or not. You kind of feel sorry for him because he doesn't have his mental faculties there. He has no filter, and he's going on and on about it. And it also does show that Basil does have some situational awareness and some morals because he's talking with Major, and he's trying to sucking up to him a little bit, but you can tell he's a little weirded out as well by Major's cavalier use of the N word and the other slurs. He's trying to divert it back to his little joke about women when it comes to his wife, which, as we've seen Sybil at times, you can kind of see why Basil's making those jokes. Now, the hotel is expecting some German guests, hence the title. They don't show up till later. Before then, Basil has to hang up a moose, which falls and hits his head, which is foreshadowing of what's going to be coming next. And this leads into a moment that John Cleese did show in his stand-up and was one of my first introductions to the show, and that is the fire drill. As he said in that comic special, part of the reason for this gag is he never understood the need for doing a fire alarm when everybody knows it's coming, which I happen to agree. And I'm happy that most of the fire alarms I've actually been a part of, mainly when I still worked at the courthouse. The deputies knew they were coming, but we and everyone else did not know they were coming. But it was kind of obvious when one was going to be coming. It's like, alright, a lot of the deputies are up here. Some of the sergeants are. It's late in the afternoon. Is one going to happen? Oh, there it goes. And then the thing here, everybody knows, and Basil's constantly reminding people, it's like, you could just tell them there's going to be a fire alarm today, and then not tell them what time, then make it a surprise. But I guess this is the attitudes of the time. It's like, the fire alarm will be promptly at noon, so be prepared. But the thing is with that, when you tell them the time, everyone's going to be going down to an area to where it's easy to get out of. So it's like, oh, I'll do it. Instead of, like playing video game. Oh, there's a fire alarm. Damn it. I'll be right back. So it kind of destroys the whole purpose of doing an alarm. You're supposed to be trying to catch people off guard. Which that plays a little bit into the gag. Because the whole gag with that is that he sets off the wrong alarm. Everyone thinks it's a fire drill. Basil's trying to tell everyone, it's not the fire drill. That's not the fire alarm. But the thing is, the fire alarm and the burglar alarm that he set off that everybody thought was a fire alarm sounds so similar. Like he says, it's only a semitone difference. When he plays them back to back, there isn't that much of a difference, so it is only a semitone. You'd have to listen to it very carefully in order to spot the difference. So you can understand the people in the hotel mistaking one alarm for the other. And then Basil trying to get them to go back upstairs and them staying. It's like, he even just says the thing, why are you guys down here? And then, of course, leads to one of my favorite little lines. I don't know why we bother. We should let you all burn. A good introduction to Basil's character for me, seeing him like this. And then Cleese cut it off right when the phone rang. He's like, yes! But to add to it, right as they're doing the fire alarm, Manuel in the other room accidentally starts an actual fire. And he's trying to tell Basil, and Basil's not believing him, like, fire, fire! And he thinks that Manuel's just getting into it like he was when all the guests thought the actual alarm had started. But no, he pushes him back into the kitchen where the fire is, and then when Basil finally does it, he's like, all right, everyone, fire, fire! He gets everyone out. Tries to use the fire extinguisher, doesn't work, and he ends up getting hit on the head again with a frying pan by standing up at the wrong moment, which, I don't know if they filmed this before that other episode, but if they filmed this one after, kind of feels like a little bit of karma from a story perspective that Manuel gets hit by Basil with one, and then now Basil gets hit with Manuel by one. Now, of course, I'm guessing that that's probably the prop one. If it was a real one, it would have been a little bit of actual real-life karma, even though that was an accident on Cleese's part that he hit Andrew with the real one. But it's also one of the things like, why do you have multiple there for that scene? Just put one. And this leads to Basil being concussed for the remainder of the episode. Which, given the nature of Basil Fawlty as a character, you can imagine the potential for this, because he usually will speak his mind. He will have some situational awareness, and he'll tone it down to just mild, dry sarcasm, and other times be a bit more open with it. But in certain situations, he'll tone it back depending on what's going on. Here, no such luck. Like, I can imagine in a non-concussed state, he would be on his best behavior for the German guests, speaking what little German he does know to them. Maybe still being a little bit of his dry self, but not going there. Without that, he's constantly saying stuff like, do not mention the war, which this is the episode that popularized that phrase. Talking to all the guests, getting one of the Germans to cry because he keeps bringing up the war accidentally, and then one of the Germans that speaks English is like, quit bringing it up. Our husband died in the war. You keep bringing it up. And then Basil's like, you started it. keeps going back and forth until he does the thing, just following orders, which of course leads into Basil doing the funny walk, which with how limber Cleese was at this time, it is a callback to his Ministry of Silly Walks days, including the little weird turn he does when he comes back into the room. And because of the fact he was supposed to be on bed rest, leads to a funny thing with a doctor and another guy from the hospital trying to get him to come back in, which just continues off from when Basil woke up in the hospital. And he was like trying to get out. Then when the doctor came in, he's like, oh, a little weirded out. He gets back into bed, waits for the doctor to leave. Close up on his face, he opens one eye, and you know from that he's going to be going. But Basil. Concussion with no filter. The perfect comedic storm, which leads to one of my favorite little ending moments where Basil gets hit on the head again, probably suffering another concussion or making his current one worse, where the one German that brought up the husband dying in the war is like, how did they ever win? Good point there, but it's like you're dealing with one that's concussed. You got to take that into account, but you can understand from his perspective why they were. And speaking of the Germans, like with other people that he mentioned, the Major seems to hate Germans, which he seems to be the personification of the mindset that Cleese is making fun of with this episode, and that is the people that just are hanging on to all the old grief from World War II. Which it's sad to see 30 years later, people still holding on to all that. I mean, it's been a generation, depending on how you slice it. You should be able to get over that. But of course, it wasn't just the British holding on to it. I mean, in certain parts of America, people were still holding on to the things against the Japanese because of Pearl Harbor. I mean, in professional wrestling, way into the 80s, certain announcers would call it, he Pearl Harbored him. And of course, stuff like, oh, I don't think the Great Muto will be able to get over as a babyface here. I don't think the fans will be able to get behind a Japanese babyface. And sadly, some of those attitudes continued even into modern times. People like Shinsuke Nakamura and Asuka are ones who are breaking out of that mold. Everyone else is either a mid-card or usually just a heel to get over big. You know, the devious Asian heel. The stereotype in that same little holding on to grudges. Of course, in certain parts of the country, you could say it's like promoters like Bill Watts who have that very old school mindset, but sometimes it's bad to hold on to it. And this is what Cleese said about his intention to make fun of this in an '08 interview. It was a joke about British attitudes to the war and the fact that some people were still hanging on to that rubbish. And I'd have to say, in making fun of that, he succeeded, having the Major be the one that's outspoken with no filter. And then, of course, Basil, because of his head injury, really stating into it and then making fun of it. It's like, those attitudes are now out in the open to make fun of. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, that thing of it being wrong then and wrong now. I'm not saying that, you know, they should have jumped up after the war and been like, okay, we forgive and forget, but that'd be like the first couple years after the war. 30 years after, it's like, okay, by this point, you're just holding on to grudges just to hold on to grudges. I mean, in some places I can understand, like if you had family members that died in the war or died during certain things. Like we see the one German character, whenever the war's brought up, she cries because of her husband. But in other circumstances, it's like, just let it go. I mean, even in modern times, we have certain things with that, but it seems to die down a little bit, and I'm not going to get into that because that's not the focus of this video. Even some of the things Basil says ties into the whole parody mindset that Cleese approached this episode with. The Kolditz salad that he refers to a Renaissance-era German castle that detained British POWs during World War II, so very insensitive for him to say without that filter, but ties into the whole joke behind the episode. And of course, there was also a show about this at the same time, so it's one of those contemporary things to throw in, kind of like how Bugs Bunny's carrot thing originated as a parody of a scene from a film. I think that Clark Gable was in where he did something similar. And then, of course, this just shows some of Basil's weird things with German. What he says in German sounds like it might be nonsense, and it kind of is a nonsense phrase. It's one of those phrases that you'll probably learn while learning a language that you'll never be able to work into a conversation. But here, he does. And this is what it translates as. I can kill bats with an egg spoon. Basil, what did the Fledermaus ever do to you that you had to kill it with an egg spoon? But apparently Cleese once spoke this to two women who asked him to speak German, and when he said this, one of them replied in German asking, really? That's something that you probably would want to see. I could kill those bats with this spoon. I can do it very well. Yeah. And another one of Basil's remarks about on the continent refers to the 75 referendum to stay in the common market, which they'd only been in a couple months at this point. And I have a feeling that if Basil still existed as a character, he probably would have voted for Brexit. Not to make any comments on that, it just seems like something he would vote for. I've only brought up Manuel a couple times in this episode and poor Andrew Sachs, but this is where he suffered another one of his injuries. I'd say this one is not as bad as a concussion, because a concussion, makes it hard to function. You can function with burns depending on the severity. In the scene where he does briefly catch fire, they did add a couple chemicals to his outfit in order to give out the smoking sensation, but apparently it soaked through his outfit, giving him second-degree chemical burns, which is like, yee, chemical burns. Makes me wonder what the chemicals were specifically. Did they know they'd soak through what he was wearing and give him those burns? Did they not think to have him wear something underneath it so there could be another layer in between? Or did they do that and it still soaked through? It's one of those accidents, I guess, where it's like, all right, well, we'll try this and see that. It could also be that he had the chemicals on too long due to takes, and then it soaked through, and then he's like, "I made it worse for what little we see of it on screen." But I feel for the guy suffering 2 injuries in the same season. He must have really loved the character to come back for the next season, or he probably figured, "Hey, it's an accident. Stuff like this happens on the set of a show every now and then. I'm still alive. Still got my health." All in all, this is a very fun, entertaining episode of Fawlty Towers. Perfect way to end the first season. Makes fun of that war mindset excellently, especially when we have Basil with no filter whatsoever after his concussion. Sybil's hardly in the episode, but it doesn't really matter there. Paulie and Manuel do play great background characters, especially when they're trying to interfere with Basil in the latter half of the episode and work with him in the first half before the Germans arrive. Major, despite his little racial slur usage, definitely helps the episode's mindset, and they do show just how far gone he is when it comes to his mindset. When the moose speaks to him, it's actually Manuel behind the desk, bending over thinking the Major knows he's there, but just the look on his face is like... Definitely an episode of the show you should watch, and one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. And like I said before, if you wanted to show one scene to tell a friend what this show was about, show them the fire drill scene. Because I don't know why they bothered. They should let them all burn.